Retired at 55. It's a trap. I did literally the exact same video about a year ago. I just turned 54 and I started talking about the ins and outs and, why in fact that we chase our entire lives for this moment where we can finally retire. We talk about these moments where, we have these visions of grandeur of sitting on the beach and enjoying the time with the grandkids and just doing all those things that we put off for our entire life. But I'm not here to talk about that and rehash that, because that is in fact a big part of the trap. And I want to talk about what this last year has looked like. Now, going from that point where that was one of my first videos I ever created on this channel to here now, over a year later, year and a half later, to the point where now I've done a whole pile of things. Do I regret it? I want to talk about any regrets. I want to talk about some things that I've done. And I certainly want to talk about the fact that, do I still believe that retirement at 55 now is a trap? I mean, I look around and I start to think, how many people, when I'm walking on these trails, we see this all the time. Now that the weather's cooling off a little bit, there's far less people out here walking around. I mean, you see me every day walking and there's somebody walking by this way, walking by that way. I find it kind of interesting and also a sign of the times, because a few times I've walked around now and there's somebody carrying a stick, almost like something from a shovel handle or something. And it sort of prompts me to think that I didn't see that a year ago at all, but I'm starting to see that today. And it's a very, very sad state of affairs, because what we're starting to see is, things aren't as rosy sometimes as they appear. And a lot of people are going through some hardships. And unfortunately, I've seen this growing escalation, probably in this summer specifically, because I didn't see anything like that. There was less people walking around, but clearly more people were either working or just not interested in walking. But also, things feel like they've changed, and perspectives and outlooks have changed for a lot of people in this last year. So when you think how much could have possibly changed in 1 year's time, even for me, actually quite a bit. So let's talk about some of that, because, I talk about retirement and being a trap at 55. There's so many people that I've come across initially when I first retired. Let's rewind this tape here now, about 365 or maybe almost closer to 400 days and beyond. Yet when I first retired, or when I first was thrust into retirement, many people said, "Oh, you can do it, Mark. You can get back in the saddle. You have great experiences. You have, a lot of education. You have a lot of value in your industry, in the electrical and the high voltage industries. You can get back in there. I know you'll be working soon." But now, here over a year later, year and a half later, I'm not working, or at least not working for a company. I've spoken throughout the channel and the OGs that I'm doing a lot more, side hustle stuff, and I do social media, and that sort of helps close in some of the gaps. And for a lot of people that have asked the question, how are you able to retire? Well, it's a combination of investments and some of the things that I've done over the years to put a few dollars in the bank. Not to mention, of course, still do a little side hustle, which, it does help. It helps close the gap. But do I regret, and do I feel that 55 retirement age is a trap? I think there's this vision that a lot of people think that retiring at 53, 54, 55 is just not reasonable. It's not realistic. And I think back at the time, I was even in a bit of shock that I was retired at 53. But now, a year later, I think, what has this last year become for me? Well, this last year has become a year of relationship development, massively. When we think about, is it a trap? Well, it's only a trap in the sense that they tell you that you're going to have all these great things in retirement, and then it just doesn't happen. But guess what? For me, this whole last year and change has been really more one in which, family, relationship development. I've always had a relatively good relationship with, my spouse and my kids. They're all pretty much adult kids now, but I pretty much always had a pretty solid relationship. But you never really know how good that is until you really put it to the test. Until you're spending time every day and you're seeing them every single day. And like every relationship, it has its moments, it has its ups and downs. But, what it has done is drawn us closer together. We share more information. We love sharing time, hanging around with each other, going out to movies, grabbing a coffee casually with no plans in mind. We just go out and do it. So that's been a big part of my year, is really building the relationships that, not that I've let slide, but certainly I really haven't dove deep enough into a relationship over the last, how many years, just because I've been busy at work. And like a lot of us, and like a lot of all of you who have, still continue to work, and you have families, and you probably wish in a lot of cases you could spend a little more time with all of them. Maybe you have young ones or a spouse that you said, it wouldn't be nice to just go hang out for a while or go spend a week here on this vacation. Or you couldn't get approved for a vacation because your boss told you that somebody else had their request in first. See, those are the moments now that I'm not worried about. And when we think about a trap, and retirement being a trap, and all these visions of what retirement should look like, it sort of is a trap in some sense, that it's never, or almost never, exactly as you expect it to be. The expectations are here, and you're kind of meeting it somewhere else. Some people it drops way short, and other people it actually exceeds their expectations. And for me, this last year, it's really given me a perspective on not just my father, who retired early, or not really early, more or less on time, many, many years ago, and I've spoken about him before too, as well as I spoke about him in my first video, which of course I'll link at the very end. And you really, if you haven't seen it, you should go take a look at that video too. But, I spoke about him, how he retired at, I guess, a ripe age, I suppose you could call it that. And so he retired, he moved on, he quit his job of construction, and he lost a finger on the railroad once because he was doing those, those pounders that pound in the pegs. It's automated. He hit it, wham, and his finger was still lining up the peg, and he lost the finger right there. He'd share those stories with us, and I know he had a long, tough career. I know he had a tough time once he moved away from the farm in Saskatchewan, and he moved to Winnipeg to start looking for work. He told me of a story. I just found out actually more recently, later in life, that he was attacked downtown Winnipeg while he was looking for work, and it wasn't good. It was basically a hospitalization. And so he's had a tough life. Then going through construction, building homes. And ultimately it means that I see this. I'm finding myself now, thinking more now, connecting more with how my father actually was. I'm becoming more like my dad. And, as we age, we quite often find that, as we're, in our late teens and our early 20s, we're like, I don't want to be anything like them. They're old. They're old-fashioned, they're ridiculous. I don't want to be anything like my parents. But now, as I get older, I'm finding more and more like I much prefer to be like my parents. My dad used to listen to country music all day. Saturday afternoon, he'd have George Jones, Tammy Wynette, he'd have Charlie Pride, he'd have all these old country singers playing all day long. And I couldn't help but think now when I hear that music, it really kind of brings me back to the past. And so these moments in this last year and a half have been more productive in other ways. And sure, not that I'm working, and many people would consider this a trap. In fact, it's far from a trap in my personal perspective. I've been building relationships. I've been reflecting on who I am internally, the type of person I am, and the type of person I should continue to be for my family, for myself. But also, it's allowed me to kind of resonate with how my parents were, connect, even think back, the things that were said, the things that were done, and how in fact that I'm a lot more like them than I even thought I would be. So this last year, well, some people feel that it's a trap retiring young. In fact, it's given me opportunity for internal growth. It's helped me expand my own belief systems and carve out more my own path of where I want to go and what I want to do. And I've been loving this last year. And well, the other day, quite some time ago, I think, here's a fun story. And just going to throw a shout out here, Ian, if you happen to be watching. So a gentleman, I think back many, many years ago, and one of my very first sports cars, it was way back. I don't know, I think I was in my early 20s. And I always wanted an old Porsche 911. It was an old one, right? It was, it wasn't that expensive. It was used. It was, nicely restored and everything, but it wasn't new by any means, and it wasn't that expensive. And I saved up a lot of money to finally buy this old Porsche, right? So I go to this house, I meet the gentleman who's selling it. We shake hands, we drive it. Life's good. I drive this car for the next few years. I sell a few years later and move on. As many of us do, we buy a toy, we kind of move on after a while. That's kind of happened. Well, interestingly enough, for some reason, we came across paths again recently in social media. And the only reason we did was we were both comparing notes on a old black Targa Porsche 911 from many, many moons ago. And this connection, this conversation we had through social media drew out the story that, wait a minute, I think we both own that same car. And then we started comparing notes, and it turned out this gentleman, I'll just say, call him Ian, was the person that I bought this car from. And this was 30 some odd, beyond 30 years ago. And so I think, wow, what a storyline is that? What an absolutely bizarre set of circumstances. So we ended up chatting, and it was a really wonderful experience. And yeah, who knows? Maybe grab a coffee or something some point, but it was great to catch up and chat and talk and reminisce and compare, what we've done in our careers. And, I shared how I come from the electrical background, and, he shares how his background was in other places in emergency response. And it was great to chat. But it was also interesting to hear that he's still working on the tail end of his career. We're almost more or less the same age. And it sort of draws in this interesting parallel and yet interesting contrast. Everybody is in their own space in terms of their career and where they see retirement, and everybody sort of does their own thing at their own time. And for me, this was about right. Do I still work? Yes. Do I still have a job? No. I love working, I love being productive, and I love building things and doing things and moving forward. I don't feel like becoming stale. And see, that's the trap that a lot of people get pulled into, is becoming stale in retirement. They believe that unless I keep working, I'm going to just go into retirement, I'm going to become stale, stare at the walls, get crinkly, get old, and maybe pass away. And a lot of people say that, once you retire, the clock starts ticking and your days are numbered. Well, I mean, that's a doom and gloom way to look at it. If you really think about it, the clock starts ticking once we're born, because we don't know when that date is. We could have 30 years, 80 years, 100 years ahead of us. We don't know that when we're born. So, but technically the clock is ticking for each and every one of us. And this is just the stark reality of what we're at. This is life in general. But having that conversation with Ian was absolutely amazing, because there's another gentleman that appreciates cars, life, and has followed kind of a similar path, and certainly has a lot of similar perspectives. And of course, like many others, sort of has that plan in place. Oh, we got a little birdie there. Speaking of passing, I don't want to draw that parallel, but there it is. But the point is, we all have that date. Some people prefer to embrace that date, and others just choose to keep ignoring it. And like a few people I've met along the way, especially when I initially retired, that say, no, I'm going to keep working till 65, 67. And they almost seem happy about the fact that a lot of these governments, including the Canadian government, are looking at possibly pushing back these benefits ages. The age where you can start pulling your pension, where now they're, in Canada it's 65, they're debating putting 67. Australia, they just pushed it back to 67. But then they sell the rhetoric with conversations like, oh, people are living longer. That's absolute bung. For my take is live your life. Don't live the expectations of what those are dropping propaganda nuggets. Rather enjoy your life today, tomorrow. And the idea of believing that retirement is a trap, there can be a trap. And for those people that don't fully embrace it and utilize it for every single day, that it's a gift. It's a gift that we have an opportunity to do something new and fresh and maybe make a new relationship. Hey, who knows? Maybe make a new friend. Ian, there you go. We reached out. Maybe there's a new friend. I'm just saying. What I'm trying to get at is the point. Retirement could be a trap. And at 55, for many people it is. Because going back to the conversation about my dad, how he retired at an average age, I love that man dearly. He was such an amazing guy that was such an inspiration to me. But the unfortunate part was, here's a man that knew nothing but work. Farm work, construction, railway. He was a hard, tough as nails kind of guy. And that was his life, was work. And the only thing he did outside of that was listen to his country music and golf. And so once he retired in his, I believe it was early or mid 60s, he started he bought a membership. He started golfing every single day. But sadly, he'd come home after, because he always loved his early tee times. He'd tee up 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. He'd be back home by 1 o'clock. Typical round is 4.5 hours for 18. He'd come back. And then, of course, when there's my mother, not really used to him being around every single day. And, of course, now all afternoon he's hanging around. And, of course, it was an adjustment. It was an adjustment for my parents with each other. And see, that's part of a trap that a lot of people may fall into, is what is the expectation of those relationships? And if you're not used to that, it could take some adjustment there to make that feel comfortable and feel like those old comfortable pair of shoes again. So after a year or two, I believe it was a couple of years of, what he considered retirement and golfing every day, he had a couple friends that were getting ill, so they weren't golfing as much. Then my dad also, of course, seemed to be starting the very early signs of dementia at that point. There was, forgetting this and calling people different names. I know he referenced me sometimes as one of his brothers. And things like that were heartbreaking when I started to see that. And to me, it was around that time, was also the time that he started to almost sort of retract from one of his biggest passions, which was golf. So he started taking that step back. His employer said, hey, Marv, come on back to work. We've got some construction projects for you. He was still he was still definitely strong in mind for the most part and was willing to manage it. So he came back and started working again. See, it's cases like that where if a person's not prepared, it is in fact a trap. You have these beliefs and these assumptions and these visions of what retirement looks like. And then if you're not prepared financially, emotionally, psychologically, friends, no friends, relationships, are you going to be a bug to your spouse? Do you have hobbies? I mean, we talk about those things that you really got to start thinking about. You were a manager, you were a director, you were a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, or whatever you were. And now you're not. The title, you threw that title off the edge of the doorway into your office, you threw that out when you left the building. That's no longer your title. What are you now? A husband, a spouse, a wife, a father, an aunt, an uncle. That's what you are now. But this is the trap. And the trap is one in which if you don't have something going on. And for me, I've had way more than enough. This year, I think how much has gone on in this last year and a half, some of which I couldn't have done if I was working. Because I did a lot of these things while, during daytime hours. I did a lot of, managing estate business for my parents. That in itself, probably for the first 4-6 months, was almost a full-time job, or at least I'd be grinding at it for enough that it would have taken me away from my regular job, and it would have been a big problem. I know my employer, well, they talk the talk, they don't walk the walk, if you know what I mean. So they say, oh yeah, you're forgiven, you can go take the time you need, but then they kind of use that against you in some ways. Later on, it becomes, you know that you're not getting certain tasks done, you have nobody else that can do it, and so now all of a sudden you've got a case where that's going to reflect on performance. So there's no forgiveness in that organization, and I knew that had I been still working there, it would have been a real serious challenge. But it all seems to happen for a reason. And so for me, that was a great experience this last year and a half. It allowed me to manage the estate business. It allowed me to spend more time and build those relationships with my family. It allowed me to take some extended vacations. We did Hawaii, we did some other holidays. It allowed me to do some other things, for sure, build some big projects. It allowed me to build this big concrete pad and all the prep work that had to go into that. I spent so much time this year working, doing things around the house, upkeep, and not just fiddly diddly work, just looking for something to do. I mean real productive work, productive activities. So it's been an absolute fantabulous year. And so for those thinking that 53, 54, 55 is a trap, it can be, absolutely. But I don't regret a minute of it. Not one single minute of this last year and a half is regretted. I love every moment. I spent every day to the max, and I can't help but think, I feel for some of those folks that I used to work with. Every once in a while, I think about, what was my whole team doing? A lot of my team, they were great people. The ones that was directly working with me, they were some amazing people, and I had some great cohorts there. Every once in a while, I get caught up thinking, I wonder what so-and-so is doing. I wonder what so-and-so is doing. And I think back, because some of them were inherently decent people, not friends per se. I mean, as we know, a lot of this is coworkers. It's got to be professional and kind of professional only. There is that reality, but there's just so many of these moments that just sort of drift into your mind sometimes, and you wonder, what are they doing? And every once in a blue moon, I stumble across one in Costco, or I see one in public, and he says, hey, how you doing? Everything good? Absolutely, never better. And so everybody sort of sets this expectation at 54, 53, 55, I should still be employed, but I've been loving life way too much. And, as a result of, planning and getting ahead of my finances in just enough of a way that has allowed me to do this, this feels so absolutely amazing to me. And, it's been a trying year. It really has, in some ways, from an emotional perspective. But there's been such an amazing amount of growth I've gone through too, internally, thinking about what makes me tick. And that to me is priceless. Also priceless is spending time that you can't get back with your siblings, your spouse, and moments that you can build those relationships. See, because when you're at work and you're grinding, you're focused on your job, and you come home and you're angry because of some things that were said, or your boss told you to do this, or you weren't good enough at that. That just upsets you and turns over the apple cart. So if you really get down to it, it can be a trap for some people. For me, not a chance. And of course, if you want to see what my perspective on this whole retirement being a trap, last year, take a look at that video right there. Go give it a look. It's basically a year and a half ago when I very first started this channel, my perspective and outlook on retirement and life, as opposed to what it is today. I think you'll find it very fascinating and a nice contrast. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, everybody, and thanks again so much. I think I'm going to go grab that coffee. Have a great one. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.